Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarne Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vanchkalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya evacha, Patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Okay, I'm just about here alone in the temple room. Of course, Radha Radhanath are here. Anyway, it's all right. Some devotees are coming in. So we're going on to the third section in the fourth chapter, which is from verse 16 to verse 24. And the subject matter is karma yoga, understanding how to work as a sacrifice, how to do work as a sacrifice. It's, well, you'll see as we go through the next several verses, sure, it gets a bit complicated. But I think it's going to be understandable. All right, so let's just have a look here. The whole section is just one piece. So we will recite all the verses now, from verse 16 to verse 24, translations as usual. All of them, that's 9 verses. So please pay attention. All right, so verse 16. Even the intelligent are bewildered in determining what is action and what is inaction. Now I shall explain to you what action is. And now I shall explain to you what action is, knowing which you shall be liberated from all misfortune. 17. The intricacies of action are very hard to understand. Therefore, one should know properly what action is, what forbidden action is, and what inaction is. Yes, now that's important. 18. Now fasten your seatbelts. This is just about the most tricky sounding verse in Bhagavad Gita. It's just a really extraordinary verse. Hare Krishna Maharaj, welcome. One who sees inaction in action and action in inaction is intelligent among men, and he is in the transcendental position, although engaged in all sorts of activities. Hare Krishna. Anyway, don't worry, we're coming back to it in a few minutes. 19. One is understood to be in full knowledge, whose every endeavor is devoid of desire for sense gratification. He is said by sages to be a worker, for whom the reactions of work have been burned up by the fire of perfect knowledge. 20. Abandoning all attachment to the results of his activities, ever satisfied and independent, he performs no fruitive action. although engaged in all kinds of undertakings. That sounds extraordinary, doesn't it? Engaged in all types of undertakings, but he's doing nothing. Anyway, don't worry. We will come back to these verses. 21. Such a man of understanding acts with mind and intelligence perfectly controlled, gives up all sense of proprietorship over his possessions, and acts only for the bare necessities of life. Thus working, he is not affected by sinful reactions. 22. He who is satisfied with gain, which comes of its own accord, who is free from duality and does not envy, who is steady in both success and failure, is never entangled, although performing actions. 23. The work of a man who is unattached to the modes of material nature and who is fully situated in transcendental knowledge merges entirely into transcendence. 24. It's the last verse in the section. A person who is fully absorbed in Krishna consciousness is sure to attain the spiritual kingdom because of his full contribution to spiritual activities, in which the consummation is absolute, and that which is offered is of the same spiritual nature. All right. So let's go back to verse 16. Here we are. And start getting into this. Yeah. And just remember, just let me remind you. Let me read the last verse we read last night. The last verse, immediate last verse before this 16. The last verse in the previous section. So, Krishna says, all the liberated souls in ancient times acted with this understanding of my transcendental nature. Therefore, you should perform your duty, following in their footsteps. In other words, you do your duty, do your work, but with an understanding of Krishna's nature. Who is Krishna? As we read in verse 9, that one should understand the transcendental nature of Lord Krishna's appearance and activities. So that duty, that action should be done. Because now we're going into these 8 or 9 verses of focusing on action. It basically means doing a duty. It's not just acting in some way or another. We're talking basically about action, doing your duty, as opposed to other variations. Anyway, we'll see about them as we go. So 16, even the intelligent are bewildered in determining what is action and what is inaction. Now I shall explain to you what action is, knowing which you shall be liberated from all misfortune. Okay, that's good. So the basic point in the purport, which is just in keeping what Lord Krishna has just been saying in those verses we read last night. Hopefully that's fresh enough in your memory. So what Krishna is saying here, let's just look at the very first paragraph in the purport. Action in Krishna consciousness has to be executed in accord with the examples of previous devotees. Has to be very authoritative action, not speculative. So therefore, and Prabhupada carries on, to act in Krishna consciousness, one has to follow the leadership of the parampara. Yeah. So these points are there. These points are there that if we act as Krishna has described in the verses we read last night, which means in devotional service, or at least in karma yoga, in which one is giving the results to Krishna, not just in some impersonal way, just being detached, something like that, but actually giving them to Krishna. So then what happens? Well, as Krishna says, then you'll be liberated from all misfortune. Yeah. Okay. So, and Prabhupada, if we look at the second paragraph, you'll see Prabhupada's emphasizing the necessity of following the parampara. And Prabhupada says, if people don't do this, if they don't follow parampara, then to quote him from paragraph 2, even the most intelligent men will be bewildered regarding the standard actions of Krishna consciousness. This is important. Oh gosh, this is just extremely important. Yeah, we have to follow parampara in Krishna consciousness. Otherwise, there is no doubt confusion will be there, and progress will not really be there. So then paragraph 3, no manufacturing, it's the same point. Following authorities, Brahma, Shiva, Narada, Manu, the Kumars, etc. Yeah. So one has to do like this. Learn how to practice Krishna consciousness like this. Because, as Prabhupada says there, only action performed in Krishna consciousness can deliver a person from the entanglement of material existence. All right, verse 17. The intricacies of action are very hard to understand. Therefore, one should know properly what action is, what forbidden action is, and what inaction is. Yes. So, first of all, Prabhupada does explain them. Prabhupada does explain these terms here. Let's just have a look, seeing it's so important. And it's just a short paragraph. Look at that. So Srila Prabhupada explains that okay. Karma refers to activities done according to Vedic injunction. Generally, that means karma kandya. Generally, karma kandya. Actually, it's not really explained in the purport of 17. Anyway, that's what it is. That's what it is. Just take it from us. That is what it is. So, karma or action means activities done according to Vedic injunction of the nature of karma kandya, means materialistic, religious activities. Forbidden action. Forbidden action. You see in the verse itself, in the Sanskrit, Krishna mentions karma, karmano, then vikarmana, and then akarmana. And yeah, okay. So karma means prescribed Vedic pious material activities. Vikarma means activities prohibited in the Vedas, activities which produce bad results, sinful activity. And then akarma refers to work performed for Krishna's pleasure. It's akarma, where in Sanskrit, when a is put in front of a word, it means not that. So no karma, no karmic reactions, no karmic reactions. In the first one, karma, which means materialistic religious activity, there are reactions, but they're pious reactions, good reactions. You get material benefit. Vikarma, sinful activity, you get bad reactions. Akarma, no reactions. That's devotional service. That's devotional service. Yes, so the whole Bhagavad Gita is aimed at helping us to understand these points, really. The whole Bhagavad Gita is aimed at helping us understand these points and then apply them in our lives. The necessity of performing akarma, reaction-free activity, pure activity. Yes, understanding our relationship with the Lord as His servants. So how to do this? How are we going to learn it? What do you think? How are we going to learn this? We're going to learn this from Parampara. So we go on now to verse 18. Verse 18, and this is the one. It's not easy, but I think we'll be able to make it clear. One who sees in action, or let me put it in a slightly different way. One who sees in action within action, and action within inaction is intelligent among men, and he's in the transcendental position, although engaged in all sorts of activities. So, what is the idea here? Krishna is saying that if you can see inaction within action and action within inaction, you're intelligent. I think many people would feel that you are confused, actually, because it tends to sound like word jugglery. So, okay, let's first consider inaction within action. Someone is performing action, but they're inactive. What on earth is this? This is referring to the devotee. The devotee is very busily engaged, as Prabhupada says, engaged in all sorts of activities. Like Krishna is encouraging and pushing Arjuna to fight. And Arjuna agrees eventually to fight as a service to Krishna. Yes, so, and fighting on a battlefield, oh my gosh. You must be super active. But when a devotee like Arjuna is very active, busily engaged in preaching Krishna consciousness, distributing books, doing deity worship, cooking for the deities, for the devotees, cleaning the temple, etc., etc., all these services, devotees are busy, they're active. But Lord Krishna is saying here that when you see this, when you see the devotees engaged in all sorts of devotional service, then you should understand what you are seeing is inaction. Nothing is happening. Means on the material level. On the spiritual level, obviously, the devotees are engaged in their different devotional services. And, some of us, we're engaged from before 4 in the morning till late at night, and there's just no stop. But because it's devotional service, then it's transcendental to the material world. It's above and beyond material activity. It's not just a nice form of material activity. It's a different category to material activity. Therefore, on the material level, there's no action happening. Nothing is happening. Inaction. Yes. You follow the point. So there's no karma and there's no vikarma. There's simply akarma, free from material reactions, free from anything material. So this is very important to understand that Krishna killed, I don't know how many people in the Battle of Kurukshetra, but plenty. He got no sinful reaction. I mean, no material reaction of any sort. Someone kills an ant. Someone kills an ant, and they get a fairly significant reaction. Yeah. So I hope that point is clear. Now, next, one who sees action within inaction. In other words, the person is trying to do nothing. They're trying to do nothing. Probably they're just sitting down and meditating or something along those lines. So apparently they're inactive. There may be practically no movement of the body. But Krishna says they're performing action. How is that? That's because even if they're not moving, for example, they have to eat. And they're not devotees. These people are not devotees. They are not devotees. They have to eat. So when they eat, they're eating bhoga. They're not eating prasad. And what did Lord Krishna say in chapter 13, the previous chapter? Chapter 3, verse 13. Chapter 3, verse 13, what did he say? That if you don't offer your food in sacrifice, you are verily eating only sin. Means you are getting reactions for sure. So then they may say, all right, we will stop eating. Haribol. Good idea? Not so good. Because if you stop eating, you kill this body. You kill your own, quote unquote, body. Of course, it's not your own. It's been loaned to you by Krishna. And he'll take it back sooner or later. But if you abuse your body, then that's sinful activity. Torturing your body. Krishna mentions much later in Bhagavad Gita, doing heavy austerities. So what are you going to do? If you eat, then you are getting karma. Must be. You eat anything without exception, you are getting karma. Even if it's, say, like eating an apple as an example. When you eat the apple, you do not kill the tree. Yeah. But still, that is the property of the Lord. And if you steal the property of the Lord, or anybody's property, then that's sinful activity, that's bad activity. So, like the Jains, if you're familiar at all with the Jains, sometimes you see the very strict Jains, at least in India sometimes. They're walking along and they have masks on. I'm sure it's very easy for them to do the lockdown because they wear them all the time, so as to not breathe in little microbes and other little beings who will then die in your nose or something like that. And then they sweep the street in front of them as they walk, so as to hopefully not kill any insects or other little beings, little insects. So they're trying to be materially inactive, but they can't, because you can't sweep all the insects out of the way. You got to eat. So in different ways, it will be unavoidable to get karmic reactions. In other words, it will be unavoidable to perform action. Be unavoidable. Even when I was a very new devotee, 1973, Srila Prabhupada stayed for a while in Bhaktivedanta Manor. And one devotee asked Prabhupada an interesting question. He said, Srila Prabhupada, when we walk on the grass, does it hurt the grass? And Prabhupada said, yes. How would you like someone to walk on your head? So the devotee said, so when we walk on the grass, we are getting karmic reactions. And Prabhupada said, yes. You should not even walk on the grass unless you are walking for Krishna in the course of your service. Then you won't get reactions. Okay, so I hope you got that point. One who sees inaction within action and action within inaction is intelligent among men. And he's in the transcendental position, although engaged in all sorts of activities. And we know what Krishna said in the previous chapter 3, that a person cannot stop acting. You cannot stop acting. You cannot remain inactive, really, even for a moment, Krishna says. So here, Srila Prabhupada makes a comment. The example is given of a boy flying a kite. Sometimes it seems the kite is coming down, and sometimes it seems the kite is going up. Someone observing sees only the boy pulling the string. Similarly, unless one is very intelligent, he cannot understand what is karma and akarma. That is the whole subject matter of Bhagavad Gita. That's from elsewhere. Yeah. So let's carry on. 19. One is understood to be in full knowledge, whose every endeavor is devoid of desire for sense gratification. He is said by sages to be a worker for whom the reactions of work have been burned up by the fire of perfect knowledge. Now, the thing is, this is just another one of these really important points. The only way it's possible to be like that is if you're Krishna conscious. Otherwise, if you're an impersonalist, what to speak of a materialist, even if you're an impersonal spiritualist, you will not be able to perform activity which is devoid of desire for sense gratification. Because even your desire to merge, if you're an impersonalist, the desire to merge into the body of the Lord is a desire for sense gratification. I want to become God. That's the biggest desire for sense gratification you can have. Because God has everything. Yes. So in order to achieve this, the state, Sri Sri Radharanath Sri Giri Govardhan Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Ki Jai. In order to come to the state where every endeavor is devoid of desire for sense gratification, one has to engage in Krishna consciousness. And verse 20. So there's a theme in these verses now. Yeah. Abandoning all attachment to the results of his activities, ever satisfied and independent, he performs no fruitive action, although engaged in all kinds of undertakings. And yes, it's a fact. Srila Prabhupada again makes the point, it's just such an important point, that the only way to get into that condition is through the cultivation of Krishna consciousness. Yes, that you don't care for yourself, you don't care what will the result be. And you're always satisfied. You're independent of whatever's going on in the material world. The only way to be in that state is through Krishna consciousness. Because otherwise, we mentioned just recently about Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 10, Chapter 2, verse 32, 10 to 32, famous verse, that the patantyada nadrata yushmad angrayaha, that because the impersonalists, that the verse is about the impersonalists, because they have no regard for the lotus feet of the Lord, therefore they fall down, patantyada. They fall back down onto this level. And what to speak of the materialists? A materialist who has abandoned all attachment to the results of his activities. Obviously, by definition, you cannot find such a person. So 21, such a man of understanding acts with mind and intelligence perfectly controlled, gives up all sense of proprietorship over his possessions, and acts only for the bare necessities of life. Thus working, he's not affected by sinful reactions. And you know, the thing is, these verses, there's the series of verses here, which is pretty much going to take us to 24. And they're just explaining in very slightly different ways. And sometimes they're even repeating the same point. What is the nature of a transcendental person? Yeah, the Krishna conscious person. That they have no sense of proprietorship over possessions. Only they're satisfied with the bare necessities of life, acting with mind and intelligence perfectly controlled, and in this way they're not affected by sinful reactions. Prabhupada says it's an interesting point. In the purport of this verse 21, the devotee, he moves exactly like a part of a machine. As a machine part requires oiling and cleaning for maintenance, so a Krishna conscious man maintains himself by his work, just to remain fit for action in the transcendental loving service of the Lord. Okay, 22. He who's satisfied with gain which comes of its own accord, who is free from duality and does not envy, who is steady in both success and failure, is never entangled, although performing actions. Because ultimately at least, Lord Krishna is talking about who? The person who has understood the Lord's appearance and activities. This is like the key. And of course, from that key, the whole of devotional life develops. But still the key is that knowledge, understanding the transcendental nature of the appearance and activities of the Lord. Yes. So it's just being repeated a few times here. And here's a quote from Prabhupada, not from the purport. Samasiddha vasiddho cha. If you're working for Krishna, it is Krishna's decision whether you're successful or not successful. The word here is asiddho. This means don't think that because you're Krishna conscious, you'll always be successful, for it really doesn't matter. If you're unsuccessful, then be assured that this is Krishna's arrangement. To know and accept this is to be Krishna conscious. So never be depressed because you're unsuccessful. A devotee is never depressed in this horrible condition of life. Tatenu kampam susamikshama. No. And verse 23. The work of a man who's unattached to the modes of material nature and who's fully situated in transcendental knowledge merges entirely into transcendence. Yes. So the person is working in spiritual consciousness, in Krishna consciousness, and is nicely situated in transcendental knowledge, because it's on the basis of that knowledge that the person then engages in that work or that devotional service. And 24, a person who's fully absorbed in Krishna consciousness is sure to attain the spiritual kingdom because of his full contribution to spiritual activities in which the consummation is absolute, and that which is offered is of the same spiritual nature. So, in other words, someone who's absorbed in Krishna consciousness like this, engaged very nicely in Krishna conscious activity, service to the Lord, then there's a type of consummation, meaning just sort of merging into, entering into, and just becoming unified with, his spiritual activities are connected to Krishna, and he is connected, the devotee, with devotional service, good qualities manifest. So this is a type of consummation, making everything complete. So, So like this, the devotee's life merges into transcendence. And Prabhupada makes the point that the devotee, in service to the Lord, in many cases, in many ways, will be doing the same types of activities that the non-devotees do. The non-devotees have lectures, they buy things, they sell things, they eat, they talk. But we, of course, we're doing these for Krishna. So therefore, the consummation is absolute. Well, what is offered? The service is absolute. And when the service is accepted like that by the Lord, then everything is made complete. Prabhupada says, I think at the end of the purport of verse 24, let me just check. Yes. Srila Prabhupada says, in that condition of spiritual consciousness, the contributor, the contribution, the consumption, the performer or leader of the performance, and the result or ultimate gain, everything becomes one in the absolute, the Supreme Brahman. That is the method of Krishna consciousness. Doesn't mean that we merge like the impersonalists, but it does mean everything, including you, become transcendental like Krishna. Krishna is Satchitananda, and when you're engaged in his service fully like that, you become Satchitananda, qualitatively one with the Lord. All right, so now we go into the next section from verse 25 to verse 33. And it's a little, it's not so complicated really. You just have to bear some things in mind. The section is titled, Sacrifices Properly Done Lead to Transcendental Knowledge. If you perform, there are all sorts of sacrifices, as we'll see as we go through. There are all sorts of sacrifices mentioned. And if they're properly done, they culminate, from them, one will gain transcendental knowledge. So first, it's very important to understand, what does properly done mean? Because here, for example, we're going to read just now, first verse 25. We're going to read about people who are worshiping the demigods. And then we're going to read about people who are impersonalists. These are the people described in verse 25. So the point is that if the demigod worshippers do their karma kandya properly, under proper supervision, as was mentioned just a few verses ago, under the direction of parampara, then that karma kandya is not just some independent kind of, what do they call it? Just standing on its own process. It's part of a greater continuum of activity, where different activities, the person goes from one to the next and up. And this is called the yoga ladder. This is called the yoga ladder. You start with karma kandya, and if you do it properly under proper direction, then you will come to karma yoga. And then if you do that properly, you may go directly to bhakti yoga actually, or you may go to jnana yoga. And in all of these activities, even the karma kandya, the person is being trained to recognize that even though I'm worshiping demigods here, but they're subservient to Krishna. Because in all the bona fide demigod sacrifices, Vishnu is worshipped in all of them as the supreme deity. And then there is the worship of whichever demigod the program is aimed at. So let's go through them. Normally I read all the verses, right? But now I'm just going to go verse by verse. 25. Some yogis perfectly worship the demigods by offering different sacrifices to them, and some offer sacrifices in the fire of the Supreme Brahman. So we mentioned about demigod worship, karma kandya. If it's properly done, perfectly done, then a person will see they're being trained to become Krishna conscious. Not that they're just doing demigod worship and nothing else matters, just the demigods. And those who are impersonalists, if they're properly trained, then they'll be trained that the Brahman, that the Brahma Jyoti, the Brahman realization you're trying for, that's just one aspect of the nature of Krishna. Brahmeti Paramatmeti Bhagavan iti Shabjate. Yes, so this is the idea. This is the idea which is being described here. And therefore, because of the connection to Krishna, then transcendental knowledge will start becoming revealed. For those of you who are doing Bhakti Shastri, we have a special question based on this verse 25 we just read. So referring to Chaitanya Charitamrita Madhya Lila chapter 24, verse 161. Madhya Lila 24, 161. You must note that down, it is essential. Madhya Lila 24, 161. When a purified yogi associates with devotees, he engages in Lord Krishna's devotional service, being attracted by the Lord's transcendental qualities. So you'll be asked the question, what verse was mentioned in the class right now about pertaining to a yogi and his activities? And you must know the verse number. 26. So now here's another group of people, well, actually two groups, who are also doing sacrifices. they're also doing sacrifices, not to the demigods and not to the Brahmajyoti, but they're also doing sacrifices which, if done properly, will be done for Krishna. 26. Some, the unadulterated brahmacharis, sacrifice the hearing process and the senses in the fire of mental control, and others, the regulated householders, sacrifice the objects of the senses in the fire of the senses. So, we have brahmacharis. I was a brahmachari for 21 years. Some of you are grihastas or have been. And so you know what Krishna conscious household life is like. So the brahmacharis sacrifice the hearing process in hearing about the Lord, and they sacrifice the senses in the fire of mental control by following regulative principles. Whereas the householders, Krishna conscious householders, they are allowed to engage to some degree with the senses in ways which are generally considered material. In other words, to have a family, to have children. So in that sense, they're sacrificing the objects of the senses, means the wife or the husband is the object of the senses, in the fire of the spiritual senses. So you get the idea. If it's done properly, their particular sacrifices, the brahmacharis will advance and receive knowledge, and the Krishna conscious householders will also advance, and they will get more and more realization and understanding. In other words, more knowledge by the grace of the Lord, because of how they're living as Krishna conscious people. 27. Others who are interested in achieving self-realization through control of the mind and the senses offer the functions of all the senses and of the life breath as oblations into the fire of the controlled mind. Shoo. So this is a little more complex system of yoga. Prabhupada makes the point in the purport. This is actually the Patanjali yoga system. Yeah. So, like this, there are different types of ears in the body. They're affecting the soul. So in the Patanjali system, you control the functions of the ears in your body so that the soul becomes purified. And again, the same point. If it's done nicely, then you will understand that the purpose of it is to help you develop your Krishna consciousness, not just to become some special austere yogi. And 28, having accepted strict vows, some become enlightened by sacrificing their possessions, and others by performing severe austerities, by practicing the yoga of eightfold mysticism, or by studying the Vedas to advance in transcendental knowledge. Now we can just note that here, these are all sacrifices. 4 types of sacrifice are mentioned. First is giving charity. Second is performing austerity. The third one, eightfold mysticism, is Ashtanga yoga. And of course, the fourth one, the last one, is studying the Vedas. So, of course, if these things are done very nicely, sacrifice your possessions, give them to the devotees, give them to the temple, sell them, use the money for Krishna consciousness, or donate it to the temple, like this. So all these things, like Prabhupada mentions, austerities, like Chaturmasya. We are somewhere in the middle of Chaturmasya right now. I don't know what we're meant to be fasting from, but yogurt. Okay. Anyway, Prabhupada didn't really observe that. But one might do it. Devotees sometimes do. They don't shave. So, ideally these things should be done not independently of Krishna, but in Krishna consciousness. Yes, okay, 29. Still others who are inclined to the process of breath restraint to remain in trance, practice by offering the movement of the outgoing breath into the incoming, and the incoming breath into the outgoing, and thus at last remain in trance, stopping all breathing. Others, curtailing the eating process, offer the outgoing breath into itself as a sacrifice. Haribol. We say to you, good luck. Good luck. This is not really for us. But even so, if it's done with a foundation of Krishna conscious understanding, it's possible the person will actually advance. Prabhupada says at the end of the purport, a Krishna conscious person, however, being always situated in the transcendental loving service of the Lord, automatically becomes the controller of the senses. His senses, being always engaged in the service of Krishna, have no chance of becoming otherwise engaged. So at the end of life, he's naturally transferred to the transcendental plane of Lord Krishna. Consequently, he makes no attempt to increase his longevity. He is at once raised to the platform of liberation. And I think we'll just read verse 30, and that will be enough for tonight. So Lord Krishna, he's summing up or beginning a summarizing now. All these performers who know the meaning of sacrifice become cleansed of sinful reactions, and having tasted the nectar of the results of sacrifices, they advance toward the supreme eternal atmosphere. So yes, that's true. As long as those things are done in Krishna consciousness. If they're not, it's another story. And as always, Prabhupada is emphasizing the Krishna conscious aspect and not just being a yogi or doing this austerity or that. So we will carry on. There's still another 3 verses in this section which are in sort of the mood of summarizing, but that's fine. We will go on to them on Monday, and we'll finish this chapter on Monday. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki